Yay, okay. Oh, I can't hear you. Wait. Can you hear me? I can hear you. Nope. Let me see. Okay, my microphone is unmuted. Let me see in my settings, default speakers, default microphone. Is that better? Can you hear me? You can hear me, I can't hear you. Nothing. I still can't hear you. Oh, wait. No, I can hear you now. Oh, wait. No. Gone.
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, I can hear you.
All right, I've made it in.
I just can't hear you, Nancy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Sorry about that. Never had this problem before. All right. So hopefully people will rejoin us. If not, they'll. Let me turn this off again.
No. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you are.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to get started with the webinar here. First of all, I want to apologize to anybody who's watching it for having this problem today. And it's like one thing after another. I don't know what's going on. Can you see that on your screen?
Yes.
Okay. So today's webinar is called Healing the Gut. And we are very lucky to have several people here who are very knowledgeable on this subject. And first things first, get a piece of paper and a pen to take notes, where you be fully engaged. Silence your cell phone. Try not to multitask. Write down your questions for the end of the presentation. At the end, we will share information about an online course for you. Here's a disclaimer. We have to say this. I'm going to hide you guys for a second so it doesn't flip back and forth. So it's important that you understand that for us to present this information, we have to give you this disclaimer. So this is intended for your general knowledge. It's not a substitute for professional medical advice. And our presenters today, we have Dr. Todd Stone. He's a graduate of Northwestern Chiropractic College. He's a functional medicine practicing chiropractor for 17 years. He uses labs to get to the root cause of health problems and uses nature's plant medicines to restore balance to the body. Annmarie Cantrell is a chef and wellness educator whose mission is to reconnect people to real food to fully nourish their bodies and souls. Her passion is teaching people how simple, delicious, nourishing, and healing food can be. I'm a 93 graduate of New York Chiropractic College. I've done extensive work in pediatrics. I've also done a lot of work with what's called neurologically based chiropractic, which is talking about stress and how stress can affect our body. And I'm also a chiropractic nutritionist. Dr. Stone will take over at this point. Todd, are you there? It shows that you're muted.
Mute. Okay. There we go.
Okay. We ready, Todd?
Yep. Am I back? No.
Yep, you're back. Todd, do you see the screen?
There we go.
Okay.
Did that do it?
Yep, you're
Can you
good.
hear me? Okay. So the history goes back to 1930 and 40s with Dr. Hans Selye. He is the doctor credited with doing all the research on documenting the effects of stress on the body. He found and I'll go through the different types of stress that he looked at, but he found that the adrenal glands hypertrophy, that means they get larger. And that's our stress glands. The thymus gland, which is the primary immune organ, shrinks. Atrophy means it gets smaller. And then erosions of the stomach and intestinal lining, the lining would break down. Can you forward?
Yeah, I'm working on it.
So in his research, he injected subjects with organ tissue extracts. That was his first experiment. And he would put in adrenal gland tissue, thyroid gland tissue, and I don't even know if he appreciated exactly what he was doing because he was exploring, but he was introducing a foreign material that would cause an immune reaction. And that immune reaction is the stress process. Then he used chemicals primarily, and this is what he used consistently was formaldehyde. He found that was a very consistent effect. And then any bacteria, viruses, and then he would do life stress. So in an animal, he would put cages next to a predator. He would play loud noises or never turn the lights off. And he would see in every form of stress, he would see that same three things happen: the immune system shrinking and weakening, increased adrenal size and efficiency. And you do not want to be efficient at being stressed out, the stress chemicals, and the erosions and thinning of the GI lining. We call that finding with the intestinal hyperpermeability, increased permeability. It leaks, and so the common name is leaky gut. If we think of the GI lining just like as a barrier, just like the skin is a barrier, if the skin is scratched, cut, it passes infection. We use antimicrobials to protect ourselves when our skin is broken. So when that happens in the gut, when it breaks down, you can see how that looks inside of us. we actually pass undigested food and waste product into our bloodstream, and that ignites an immune activation, causing inflammation. And in my experience, I see people restricting foods and then more foods and more foods. And what they need is to get to the root cause, the hyperpermeability. I'll share a couple cases that were probably the most severe. Case one is a 4-year-old female, severe eczema. When she came in, her diet was restricted to rice and lentils, and that was it. Anytime they explored, if they tried to give her some sunflower seeds, this was an actual experiment, she had a flare-up all around her mouth. If she tried whole wheat or any wheat product, her head to toe, a full body rash. And of course, they were a 4-year-old, 3-year-old at the time was very irritable, the frustration and the helpless they had been to so many doctors. Case number 2, it was a 40-something female. Primary complaint was hypothyroid, hair loss, and insomnia. Her diet was restricted to protein. She could eat really any type of protein, and 7 vegetables. I don't remember exactly what they were, but I remember this story. She would have, she tried broccoli, and clumps of hair would fall out, and she wouldn't sleep for 3 days, and she would be completely exhausted. So she was just hanging on this very restricted diet, and she was mad because she had been to a lot of doctors, had started to do her own research and figured out a few things. So she wasn't trusting, and she was very frustrated. You can imagine. These were the most severe cases I have seen. Others always follow what Hans Selye discovered. Immune wasting, you get allergies, recurrent infections, skin irritation, stress efficiency. If you become efficient at producing adrenaline and noradrenaline and cortisol, things that stress out our body, you will have states of anxiety, depression, exhaustion, and insomnia. You see the GI erosions, which causes the food sensitivity, bloating, IBS, ulcers, reflux, and of course, if the inflammation gets large enough, you're looking at inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis. Any of those could happen. And a more recent finding is in our hormone system, we actually get a gender reversal, which means in women, they start to produce more testosterone and men more estrogen as your body gets more and more stressed out. And so for men, that means gynecomastia, where they grow breast tissue, and with women, facial hair, and the libido goes away. Case number 1, we discovered through our diagnostic testing that the trigger, what started the stress process, was exposure to formaldehyde. Formaldehyde these days is everywhere. It's in fabrics, glues, fire retardants. We had an issue with our daughter Savannah where her pajamas caused a rash, and I had no idea that they had fire retardants in them. And as Nancy pointed out, that vaccinations also have formaldehyde in them. And that was his primary stress trigger. So what we did to help her is we used a trace mineral called molybdenum, which is known in biochemistry to help bind and eliminate formaldehyde, and then a specific bacteria called Lactobacillus bulgaris. That's not a bad guy. That's a good guy. That's one of the probiotics. That is named that because of its origin in Bulgaria, and it has been researched that these special bacteria actually bind toxins in our gut. And then we used what I call renursing. We have a product that contains immunoglobulins from colostrum, and that's the first, in nursing, that's the first form of milk that comes. And so I call it renursing. The results, her rash went away completely, and she was actually able to go back to every food, including all the tough to digest ones, or the ones that are more likely allergens like wheat, dairy, and soy, etc.
Todd,
Yes.
how did you figure out it was formaldehyde?
In her case, we did muscle testing. So
So you have
we
a
actually
whole
did.
list of things you ask the body and figure out what it is from there.
Right. So her body just showed a stress response from contact with the formaldehyde.
And is molybdenum and Lactobacillus vulgaris, are they both remedies for formaldehyde exposure?
Molybdenum is very specific to formaldehyde, and there's a larger category that um, is just aldehydes. So it's specific to the aldehyde group, including formaldehyde. Lactobacillus vulgaris is really all toxic chemicals.
Okay.
Case number 2, this one we actually did a stool test, and our diagnostics found parasites. I can't remember, it was like a hookworm or something like that. The remedy used was a tropical plant called noni that has, thousands of years of history for treating microbial infections, including worms. And here again, and I guess this is in the toughest cases, the re-nursing is a must. So we use that colostrum immunoglobulins again. And her results, kind of funny, on a visit after things had straightened out, she brought in a Leinenkugel beer and said, this is the last food that she has that reaction to. So she had a few beer, and she had her, hair started falling out again, and she couldn't sleep for a couple nights. And she handed me the beer and said, fix me on this.
And did you?
we actually did.
Okay.
She was able to have some beer, of course, moderation we all have to control, but she was able to have a few with no reaction down the road.
Wow.
So leaky gut, by definition, is the breakdown of the mucosal lining, the barrier, leading to absorption of undigested food and waste, which results in an immune activation and inflammation. This turns on your disease genes, and you experience the most unpleasant and unhealthy version of you. And you can check your grandparents to see how it will get you. My grandpa passed of, or suffered with Alzheimer's. So that's my favorite organ, is the brain. So I definitely don't want to turn on these genes. The cause is stress of all types. Nancy's going to talk more about life stress, but the ones specific in functional medicine are the GI infections, parasite, yeast. They call yeast and candida now the American parasite, and bacteria. Chemicals, how much we put into our environment these days. Formaldehyde, hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons, we have a power plant, and the what it releases into the sky is the category of hydrocarbons. Phenols are cleaning supplies, heavy metals like lead and mercury and aluminum, pesticides, herbicides, plastics, radiation, all will be a cumulative stress on the body. And then in any immune system dysfunction, and actually my history is that I had multiple rounds of antibiotics when I was an infant, and it triggered a autoimmune disease called ITP, where your blood won't clot anymore. So antibiotics can really lead to some immune dysfunction as well.
Well, and I'm looking at this list, knowing that we have these things everywhere, right? And it's not like you can go live in another part of the world and not be exposed to these things. So I guess what I'm trying to say, it's important to do detoxes and cleanses regularly.
Yeah, we've got to support those systems on an ongoing basis for sure. The effects, because this is a root cause, any chronic condition can be triggered. Things I've seen personally: pain, heart disease, brain fog, cancer, diabetes. We had a cancer case probably a decade ago who's still in remission, I guess you would call it. He's treated with Mayo Clinic, 5 failed treatments. His next option was an experimental drug, which always makes me a little nervous. And he was a welder, exposed to toxic heavy metals, and we did a protein detox, and just supported his liver and kidneys to detox, and he's been cancer-free now 8 years.
Wow. And again, the other thing that this makes me think about is how important it is to work on staying healthy and not waiting until you have a health problem. Because, sometimes people find out they have advanced cancer and they didn't even know it. They go to the doctor for something else and then they discover they have cancer. But it seems like it'd be a lot easier if we took steps to just stay healthy all the time.
Yeah, if you see disease as a process, that's something that builds up, it's way easier to stay healthy than it is to reverse that process. And cancer is in a very advanced dysfunction.
Yeah.
The resolution, the 4 R's. We have to remove the triggering stress factors, whether that's bacteria, chemicals, whatever is there now. We have to restore digestive function. That might mean supplying enzymes, hydrochloric acid, or there are plant medicines that I actually prefer that stimulate digestive function. We need to repair, and the example I used was the immunoglobulins, but there's several other plants that help to rebuild that intestinal lining, such as sacred dock and slippery elm. And the amino acid glutamine is used quite a bit to help rebuild. And then we have to reinoculate with healthy bacterial flora, probiotics and prebiotics, which are the food that the bacteria in our gut eat.
And what do you say that a problem? I think a lot of people, when they either take vitamins or supplements a lot to stay healthy, people like us, right, that have been trained and we know all this stuff, so we want to stay healthy, so we're trying to get a step ahead. But then what if they have leaky gut and they're doing a ton of supplements? To me, it sounds like it's probably not a good idea. That you need to repair the leaky gut first.
Yeah, especially pill type supplements are not going to work if you have leaky gut, because your digestion is not going to be ideal. You're not going to absorb it. So that's, you gotta start with the highest priority in every situation, for sure.
Yeah. So this is Annmarie's part. Annmarie, can you unmute your microphone? Annmarie? Hello, Annmarie, can you unmute? There's a little, click on your box and you should be able to unmute your hello, Annmarie. It shows that her mic is muted. Annmarie, can you hear me? I think she muted her mic because there's a lot of feedback. Annmarie, Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
There you are, good.
Okay. Okay, I don't know what happened, but it wasn't letting me unmute. So, hi. Yeah, so I would love to talk about starting to heal leaky gut with food. And for me, just to give you a little bit of background, it was really my own experience about 20 years ago, being sick with food sensitivities and depression, anxiety, muscle pains, brain fog, and it was really 20 years ago. Nobody could really tell me what was going wrong. And the only solution that people had for me were to put me on drugs or steroids or some psychiatric drugs because thinking I was under so much stress that this was all in my head. And it wasn't until I found out that I actually had a systemic yeast infection or candida that was causing this leaky gut and causing all of these immune reactions within my body that I really started to understand the connection between food and healing. So then really started this journey on changing the foods that I was eating in order to start to heal my gut. And there wasn't all of this information that we have today 20 years ago. So it was very much a learning curve for me, and it was an incredible journey. And so that's why I just love talking to people now about this journey, because there's so much more information. And the big thing for me that it really comes down to, number one, is that we have to go through this paradigm shift. I think because we are, as a culture, so used to that little purple pill, and we're always looking for a quick fix. And this might not always be a quick fix. So what we're looking for is a shift in our perception where we are now in control of our well-being. And so we're empowered to make the changes. And in order to do that, we really need to become connected to how we're feeling in our body and also how food makes us feel. So the first thing I always talk to people about when I start working with food is, so how do you feel after you eat a banana? How do you feel after you eat pasta, right? So what are those reactions that you're feeling? Are you noticing that you get really, really sleepy after you're eating? Are you noticing that you may start getting really stuffy after you eat? Do you notice that maybe a headache comes on? And sometimes these are symptoms that we just push aside. But the more we start to listen to our body, the more we can start to get some clues about how food is affecting us. And some of those foods, are maybe some of the foods that we need to be restricting because of our leaky gut. And those are some of the foods that are affecting us. So that's the first thing, that I always ask people to look at. First of all, how do you feel when you eat, right? And then also what foods make you feel really good as well. And then if you want to start to change that, we do that kind of very slowly because this isn't an overnight process, but we're going to remove all of those foods. And again, working with someone who's maybe doing testing, with you, allergy testing or food sensitivity testing, but really starting to remove all of those foods if you do have an allergy to something, or if you are sensitive to gluten and those markers are coming back very high, we're going to remove those foods. But we also want to start literally thinking outside of the box too, and stop going down the prepared food aisles. And we want to start shopping in our supermarket on the outside of the supermarket where all of the fresh fruits and the fresh vegetables, dairy and meat are. And one of the first things, that we should look at removing are all of those processed foods, right? Dr. Todd was talking about all of the chemicals that affect our body, and there are so many chemical additives in so many of the processed foods on the shelves. Sugar, whether it is, a conventional beet sugar or even a cane sugar, or all of the sugar substitutes like a Splenda, those all affect our body as well. We want to start to look at removing those. Conventional dairy, and by conventional dairy I mean that is dairy from cows that are raised in what's called CAFO, C-A-F-O, which just stands for Confined Animal Feeding Operations. So those animals are given A, probably high doses of antibiotics, and B, they're fed grain, typically genetically engineered grain like corn and soy and canola meal. And they really don't see the light of day, right? And so cows and all animals are meant to be out on pasture in the sunlight, eating the fresh growing green grass. So if you choose to do dairy and dairy is not an issue for you, I would stay away from all of that conventional dairy and opt for organic grass-fed dairy where those cows are not given antibiotics, they're not given growth hormones, and they're also eating grass. Sometimes you need to watch because those cows are fed supplemental grain. My preference is always, 100% grass-fed, that the cows are just eating grass, and in the winter they're eating hay. You're going to get a much higher vitamin profile in that organic dairy than you are going to get from conventional dairy. Like I said, taking out those chemical additives and really educating yourself about genetically engineered foods. So those genetically engineered foods are things like corn and soy and canola and sugar. And now there are some vegetables on the market like zucchini. There were mushrooms that were just approved to go through, and there are apples and potatoes on the market that are genetically engineered. And apart from the genetic alteration that is happening with these crops, where the DNA is actually being changed in these crops, what I see as one of the biggest problems is that these crops are being genetically engineered to withstand pesticides. So your corn and your soy and your canola are being sprayed with Roundup, basically. And after, 20 years of having genetically engineered foods on the market, now we finally understand all of this research is coming out talking about how dangerous those herbicides are, that the active ingredient in Roundup is something called glyphosate. And we now know that glyphosate actually can change the milieu of your gut bacteria. So it allows the pathogenic bacteria to thrive while it kills off the beneficial bacteria. So if you're eating genetically engineered foods, you're going to be eating those foods that are sprayed with that glyphosate. Another interesting thing, crops that are not genetically engineered, but all of your legumes and your grains like rice and millet, and if they're not organic, they are also going to be sprayed with Roundup before they're harvested. So farmers use the Roundup as something called a desiccant, which means that they use it to help dry the crop before they go to harvest it. So any inorganic grains and beans, potatoes, things like that are going to be sprayed as well. So it's really something that people need to educate themselves about, because genetically engineered foods are not labeled in this country, even though we've had such a strong fight for the past 4 to 5 years to try to label these foods. They're not labeled, and I don't see them getting labeled anytime soon. So it's really up to the consumer to become empowered and really be aware of the foods that they're eating. And I would say GMOs are my #1 food on the list to really start to avoid completely. And you're going to find 80% of all of our processed foods on the supermarket shelves contain some sort of genetically engineered ingredient.
I have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
How do you find a dairy that is, how you describe it? How do you know the farmers, being honest?
So the other thing about connecting to your food and connecting to how food makes you feel is I work a lot with people on connecting to who is growing their food. So for me, that's about going local, and it's about going small scale. So if you're in an area where there's a plethora of farmers markets, shop at those farmers markets, because you're going to be able to have face-to-face conversation with the people who are producing the food that you are buying, and you can have very honest conversations with them. Excuse me, most farmers, when you're looking them in the eye, are going to tell you what their growing practices are. So for me, it's going up to a farmer and saying, can you tell me about how you are raising your cattle? Are you using antibiotics? Are you spraying your grass? If they're grass-fed, is the grass sprayed? Or are you using organic methods to take care of your grass? And so it's creating that connection. The other way people can get a link for farms is to go on the website for the Weston A. Price Foundation, which is www.westonaprice.org. And on their homepage, you can go to the link that says local chapters. So every chapter leader for the Weston A. Price Foundation should have a verified farm list that they give to the public. And so those farms that they have on their farm list are vetted. And so the chapter leader is looking and asking all of those questions for you, and then you can get that farm list directly from them.
So can we get a list from you of questions to ask?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so once you begin to avoid those foods and you take them out, you want to start including healing foods in the diet. Like Dr. Todd was saying, he had a patient who came in and was restricted to 4 foods, right? And I do a lot of work with children with autism, helping them do the dietary and environmental interventions as well. And one of the first things that these kids are put on are gluten-free and dairy-free diets. But a lot of times there's this misconception, and we think, well, as long as we're taking out the gluten, my child should be fine, or we should start to see a resolve in some of his symptoms. And when they don't see that, they'll say, oh, well, the gluten-free diet really didn't work for us, so we're going back to eating, pizza and grilled cheese sandwiches. But for me, it's always about you're restricting, so you're taking something out, but at the same time, you need to include healing foods back into the diet. So it's not just enough to take things out. You want to include those healing foods. And so a lot of those healing foods for me are those probiotic foods. So the lacto-fermented foods, which will be adding the good bacteria into your gut, full of digestive enzymes. Other fermented foods like yogurt, if you can tolerate dairy, like the Lactobacillus vulgaris is actually used in a yogurt culture as well. Kefir or kefir, which is a different culture that you can use to culture dairy or culture actually a sugar water. Drinks like kombucha, if your body can handle kombucha, right? And so this is where people really need to understand how they feel on certain foods, because fermented foods are great. Can everybody handle them? No, not at all. So if this is something that you're going to be starting, you may want to start very small, right? And it's not like you're going to be eating a pint of sauerkraut, every day. You might be eating a teaspoon to a tablespoon of sauerkraut every day until you start to build up the tolerance and your gut really starts to heal. Other foods like bone broth. Bone broth is one of probably the oldest traditional foods, paired right up there with the fermented foods. But bone broth is actually taking the bones of, again, a pastured animal, so a chicken, a lamb, some beef, and letting that stock simmer for 6 hours, 8 hours. Some people do 24 hours, some people do 72 hours, and letting it simmer. And what's happening is all of those minerals are leaching out of the bones and into the bone broth. And so when you consume that broth, you're consuming all of those minerals. There are also many amino acids in bone broth that are very healing to that gut lining. And the nice thing about bone broth for me, why I love it too, is because it really lets your digestive system rest for a little bit. So it helps your body absorb nutrients without really having to work for it. So I like to drink bone broth just as a cup of tea in the morning with a little pinch of Celtic sea salt and a little pat of raw butter. And to me, that's a really healing, nourishing food, and that's my go-to rather than a cup of coffee. So the bone broth is really great. And again, people will have to see for themselves about what they can handle, right? If people are extremely sick, a lot of times people can handle a very long cooked bone broth. So instead we do a meat broth for them that's cooked only a couple of hours. Longer cooked bone broths have glutamates in them, which can affect a person if they do have a very significant leaky gut issue. Other foods to include in the diet are traditional fats. So really removing those vegetable oils. So staying away from the corn oil, the soybean oil, the canola oil, and including the traditional fats like coconut oil, which is antimicrobial, it's antifungal, so it's a very great oil for helping to heal the gut and getting rid of pathogens in the gut. But also butter. Butter is an amazing superfood as well, and it's very high in a compound called butyric acid. So the butyrates in studies are shown to keep colon cancer at bay, so it has these anti-carcinogen properties to it. If people can't tolerate the dairy piece per se, then there's always ghee, which is a traditional Ayurvedic food, and the ghee is basically butter where the milk fats are cooked out, so you're just, where the milk proteins are cooked out, so you're just eating that milk fat. And in Ayurvedic tradition, it's a very healing food for the digestive system, actually for all systems of the body. Other fats that I love too are those traditional tallow and lard. So the tallow comes from meat or fat that is rendered from beef, and lard comes from fat that is rendered from pork. Pastured proteins, again, making sure that your animals are out on pasture, that they're not eating genetically engineered grain. Some animals do need to eat grain, like chickens, need to eat some grain. And so you just want to, again, talk to the farmer, talk to the person who's producing those chickens for you if you can, if you have that relationship with someone, and ask them how those animals are being fed. And then organic vegetables, again, really looking at avoiding all of those pesticides because we don't want to add another toxic burden to our body. So eating organically as much as possible. And, we'll be talking about ways too, upcoming in other modules about how to do that and to do all of this on a budget without really breaking the bank as well, because it is possible to eat well and heal yourself without, spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, which I think is sometimes a big stumbling block for people, right? Because food in this country is so cheap, but yet it's making us so sick. So how do we, again, change that paradigm?
So I have a question for you, Annmarie. I know in other countries, like I believe in China, they start the day off with, I believe it's bone broth, because it's a gentle way to wake up the digestive system before they even, eat anything else for breakfast. Do you know that to be true? Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, a lot of cultures eat soup in the morning. Japanese culture does as well. Miso soup is a very traditional breakfast food in Japan. And it is because it's very light and it's very easy for the digestive system. And, for us, it's, Cheerios and bagels, right? And so we need to rethink that. A lot of times I'll have leftover dinner for breakfast. Protein and vegetables. It's a nice way to start your morning.
So what is the cause of leaky gut? We've just talked about a lot of different things here, but I think the overall picture is that it's stress, whether the stress is in the form of environmental toxins, whether it's emotional, mental stress. There are so many stressors in our lives that if you look at it, most people will tell you that stress is the cause of most diseases. So now that we understand from what Todd explained to us what stress does to the gut, it's really easy to understand how environmental issues, environmental toxins can actually cause these problems. So this is a stress fact. Current medical research states that 95% of all diseases and illnesses are caused by stress, and only 5% are considered genetic in nature. So what is fight or flight, and how does it have an effect on our body? So when we are in a stressed out state, when we're having a lot of stress, whether it's we're taking a walk in the woods and we come across a bear, which happens here in Asheville, North Carolina. I walk down my street and I come across a bear, or I'm fighting traffic like I used to deal with when I lived in Philadelphia, or I have a boss that I can't stand. Our body responds the same way. It doesn't differentiate whether it's having a fight with my spouse or coming across a bear. It goes into this thing called fight or flight. And what happens is our heart rate increases, our respiration increases, because we're in survival mode. And survival mode is we need to run away from our current situation and start doing something else, especially if we're confronted with a bear. Well, you probably don't want to run away, but you get my understanding that we're in survival mode. So when we're in survival mode, do we need to think about going to the bathroom? That's not high on the list. What's high on the list is getting away from the stressful situation. So the body starts pumping more blood to the heart and the lungs to help us deal with this. more blood to the brain so we can try to think our way out of the situation. And what happens is it takes blood away from areas that are not as important, like our digestive system. But what happens is over a long period of time with chronic stress is our body forgets how to shift out of that fight or flight. For instance, if you're stuck in traffic, when you're out of traffic, your body should return back to normal. Your heart rate should go back to normal, your respiration, maybe you won't have all these racing thoughts. But when you're doing that day after day after day, or let's say you have a child with autism, or let's say your child with autism is in that fight or flight mode all the time, the body forgets how to reset itself. So this graph here, this list of items shows you on the left is what happens when your body has an initial stress response. So the adrenaline gets, cranked up, the heart and the lungs get toned, the immune system goes into action. But you'll also see that digestion goes down, reproductive hormones go down, growth and healing goes down. Prolonged stress will actually produce memory and learning problems. I see this with kids with ADD. I'm sure you both see this as well. Pain tolerance goes down because we're actually in what's called beta, and when we're in beta, we tend to feel our pain more often. And we also have an increase in hypertension, respiratory problems, depression, digestive illnesses. So this is how it's connected with stress. Now, this is a great chart because it shows us when everything's in balance, we're not going to have a lot of symptoms. We're going to be alert mentally. We're going to have excellent health. But soon as that stress starts kicking in, our nervous system gets unbalanced. So we could find that we have poor attention. We can find that we're spacey. We can find that we have a lot of worry and low energy. If we have too much arousal of our nervous system, we might have cold hands and feet, teeth grinding, anxiety. And again, we're going to have some bowel issues as well. In this case, it's listed as irritable bowel. I see this a lot with people with chronic bowel issues, chronic stresses. They tend to have very cold hands and feet. They tend to not produce a lot of moisture in their hands, so they get really dry. And the reason why this is so important, because once you understand what's happening to your body, you can become more consciously aware of it. Another thing I see is the teeth grinding. It's like they're bracing for that bear, so they chomp down on their teeth. Their shoulders start to raise up near their ears. These are all signs of someone who has a lot of stress. Now, someone who has an unstable nervous system might start to see hot flashes, PMS, eating disorders, panic attacks, even seizures. And if you don't take care of your system, if you continue to let the stress bother you, if you don't do something about it, then you get into what's called an exhausted nervous system, and that's where you might develop cancer, fibromyalgia, depression, and all the other things listed below. So how do you change your nervous system so that it responds appropriately to stress? So one of the great things we do as chiropractors, I'm sure Todd can talk about this as well, is that we're getting you out of that chronic fight or flight. There's specific techniques that activate what's called the parasympathetics, which are that part of your body that should return it back to normal after you're in that fight or flight situation. So there's things like Logan Basic, network chiropractic, even some upper cervical techniques. They're just focusing either on the sacrum, that region, or the upper neck, or both. Yoga and meditation, you can learn breathing and relaxation techniques, and that will help get you out of fight or flight as well. And just to give you an example, if you close your eyes for a minute and you put your palms on your thighs face up, and you consciously think about it, are your shoulders up by your ears right now? If they are, just breathe in, take a very deep, slow breath from your belly, and relax your shoulders. Just let them drop. Open up your jaw, let your mouth open up, and breathe. Continue to breathe really deeply in and out through your belly, not your chest. But as you breathe in and out through your belly, and you keep the shoulders down, you let the base of your neck feel nice and relaxed. And then as you do that, start thinking about warming up your hands. Imagine the sun, the hot sun is beating down on your hands. You're at the beach if you like the beach, or you're sitting on top of a mountain, whatever makes you feel good. Think about being in that situation with your hands heating up. Continue to breathe deeply and slowly, keeping your shoulders relaxed, feeling your facial muscles relax. As you do that, you should start feeling more relaxed. And that's one way that you can get out of fight or flight on your own. Another way is with what's called light and sound therapy, which initiates what's called the relaxation response. It's the same thing. If you continue doing that breathing exercise, that would also initiate the relaxation response. But this is without any effort. What it is the glasses have strobe lights to bring up certain brain waves that will make you very relaxed. So the brain waves that are active before you go into a deep sleep. And what it does is it's an algorithm that goes back and forth between these different brain waves so that it retrains your brain to handle stress better. It also teaches your body to regulate cortisol. And as you're doing this light and sound therapy, it releases serotonin and endorphins. It's paired with a guided visualization and something called binaural beats, which are certain sounds that also raise these brainwaves. It's a combination of all three things. I did it to help me with insomnia that I had for 40 years. And after 6 weeks, my insomnia was gone. I also had developed very bad anxiety and depression. I had a long history of bowel problems. And this significantly helped because it changed the way I dealt with stress. So instead of being one of those type A people who was always stressed out, I wound up helping me a lot, and to the point where sleeping is not an issue anymore. So one of the things I want to reiterate is there isn't one solution. An integrated approach works best for permanent resolution of this problem. And just to give you a better understanding, let's say you are doing all this stress reduction stuff, which is great, but your bowel problem's not going to go away until you start treating it. Using these healing foods that Annmarie has talked about, using some of these supplements. If you have parasites or bad bacteria in your gut, you need to fix the problem. You can't just do one thing. And likewise, let's say you have an extremely stressful job, or let's say your problem is because you've taken excessive antibiotics or taken things that have heavy metals like vaccines. Well, if you go and treat the problem using the methods described by Annmarie and Dr. Todd, and you don't eliminate these stressors, these chemical stressors, you may get some short-term benefit, but you're not going to have long-term relief. So it's important that you address all these different aspects. So before I get off, I want to tell you that the three of us are going to offer a very deep, allow you a course to really dive deep. We're each going to offer one module. Dr. Todd's going to talk about which supplements will help your specific problem. He'll go in and talk about in his module how to identify what the problem is, and then give you a starting block to start to help you heal your gut. Annmarie is going to teach us how to cook foods that heal the gut. And I'm going to be teaching stress reduction, things that you can do in your own home. And I'm just going to ask Annmarie real quick. I have to unmute you. Let's see. I don't know why it's not letting me do that. Can you unmute yourself?
How's that?
There you
Okay.
are. Can you describe what kind of things you'll teach in your portion of the course?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll go through making, you'll learn how to make a bone broth at home and what to look for and how to make a really good healing bone broth. and then how to use that in soups that you can use all throughout the winter. I'll show you how to make fermented foods, and I'll show you how to cook meals using those fats that I described.
It's great. All right, let's get back. Okay, so we're offering all 3 modules for only $47. I know if you were to take a cooking class alone with Annmarie, it would probably be $40 just for the cooking class. And for $47, you're going to get all 3 modules. It will also include a private Facebook group support. You'll get a discount on future courses that we will be offering. Plus, you'll also get a 30-day trial of the unlimited sound therapy. The only way we can do the light and sound therapy is if you purchase the glasses, but I'm going to offer anyone who decides they want to move forward and really dig deeper into this, a 30-day trial of the sound therapy with the guided visualization to help you balance your brain waves so you can change how your body deals with stress. That's normally $30 to do that. So this is really great. If you'd like to purchase the 3-module course, you can go to embodyhealth.net, click on the link that says store. Make sure you include your phone number so that we can call you, because we definitely want to check in with you. And you'll be receiving those shortly. If you have any questions or need additional information, please contact us at Dr. Todd Stone. He's True Health Family Wellness Center in South Asheville. Actually, he's in Arden, North Carolina. You can go to his website, gettherightdiagnosis.com. You can find me you can email me at embodychiropractic@gmail.com or go to my website, and Annmarie at cucinaverde.com, cucina-verde.com. I'm so Italian. Does anyone, Todd, I muted you because it sounded like there's some background noise coming from you. Can you help me out here? I'm trying to unmute you. Oh, I never had these problems before. Annmarie?
Am I back?
Oh, good, you're back.
Okay.
So do you have any final words you want to say before we get on?
Oh, geez. I can't think of anything right now. No?
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank you all. And hopefully next time we won't have technical difficulties and we'll just breeze right through this.